Welcome back, everybody, to the 62nd or 62th, or however you want to call it. That's a great way to open the show, Max. Nice. Episode of the My Generation podcast. We're back once again with returning podcast guest Emma Cussen. We spoke to her on the 7th episode of the show. That was about film photography, and again on episode 54 where we talked about poetry. Now we're going to be talking about two films that are close to both of our hearts, Her and Lost in Translation, but both amazing films. But today Emma's going to be talking about them with a twist, and the title of today's show is Her in Translation. I'll let you think more about what is that and what's coming up. And coming up later in the show as well, we've got our regular features. We've got Sammy Bacon and Harry Munday. Sammy comes onto the show every single week to give you a album recommendation. That's coming later in the show. And Harry the same, but with a film review. And we've also got music from local Kent artists Off Topic, their songs Breakdown and Regrets, coming up later on in the show. So first, going to Emma. Welcome back to the show, Emma.
Hiya, hello, welcome back.
Thank you very much for coming back on. Great to have Emma back again. And this week we're talking about two really great movies. But what's the twist? Why are we talking about these two movies specifically today?
So, the two directors of them used to be married, and there is massive speculation all over the internet, loads of theories that the films are either connected or one is a response to the other.
Amazing. And Emma's going to be taking a deeper analysis into basically proving or disproving that theory. So we're going to be going through all of that in today's episode. Her is a Spike Jonze movie from 2013 starring Joaquin Phoenix. It's probably one of my favourite films of all time, to be honest. And then Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson are the stars of Lost in Translation. But you said they were married. Where does this whole speculation begin then, Emma?
So, Spike Jonze and Sofia Coppola were two filmmakers that had quite a advanced and very, very, very long relationship. But their relationship came quickly to an end when they were married between 1999 to 2003, which a lot of people that were fans of the two were very shocked. From what I gathered from the time, Spike Jonze, he was mainly the director and obviously like going out and doing bits and bobs. But Coopola's actual directing career didn't start until later into their relationship. So she's still quite new to directing, I would like to say. But at the time of their divorce, she was still new to directing in general. And I think Lost in Translation was one of her first sets of films that she's done. And she has progressively done films since. And then Jonze has kind of always been in the directing, cinematography career. So that's where a lot of this connection comes in. Where would you like me to start on this? Would you like me to...
Well, shall we start with what both, for people who maybe haven't seen both of the movies or have only maybe watched it once, could you maybe go through just a summary of what the story is for Her and Lost in Translation?
Yep, so we've got Sofia Coppola, who is obviously a director, as I've mentioned. In 2003, she released a film called Lost in Translation. The film follows a man called Bob Harris, who is played by Bill Murray. And eventually, throughout the film, he starts to befriend a young college graduate called Charlotte, who is played by Scarlett Johansson. And they don't really tend to leave the hotel, but they end up making friends in a Japanese hotel. I think the film was mainly situated in Tokyo at the time, where they both so happened to be staying at. Bob is there on a business trip, whereas Charlotte's character, she's there with her newlywed John, who's played by, I think you pronounce it Giovanni Ribisi. I don't know how to pronounce that. But yeah, Charlotte's character's there with her newly husband John. And then on the other hand, we have Spike Jonze's Her, which the full working title is actually called Her, an Unloved Story. And that film follows, which came out in 2013, follows Theodore Tomley, who's played by Joaquin Phoenix, who has progressively throughout the film starts to fall into a romantic relationship with Samantha, who's played by Scarlett Johansson again, who she is a voice character, which is an AI virtual assistant. Throughout the film, though, throughout the two films, we kind of see this sort of connection between the two, that both of them are having struggling relationships. On the main hand, Lost in Translation has notably been exploring the themes of loneliness, insomnia, boredom, and culture shock. Both the characters are like there for certain reasons, but from someone that's been to Japan themselves, and from what a lot of friends of mine have told me, Japan tends to have this theme, a sense of loneliness. Everyone's so busy. Everyone's either going to work or coming from work. No one really talks to each other there. The culture is so, I don't know how to describe it, but they're very, very modest. So they don't really talk or touch or interact. And it kind of goes from that sort of theme. But then also we see the same theme in Her, where Theodore kind of lives on his own, is falling out of a divorce with his ex-wife, and she also, and they also, that film also explores the same sort of films, but I think Her instead was set in Shanghai and Los Angeles. They kind of mashed the two cities together. But I feel like I've explained that in a nice broadened sense.
That should give people an idea of the movies. And I know with Her as well, didn't they add sort of CGI buildings as well, just to make it feel a little bit more, because it's set in the slightly distant future, Her. But yeah, so you've gone through. It would be great to really explore where those theories first began, but maybe taking it a step back to the relationship between the two directors.
So the two directors, like I've mentioned, were married. Now, this will kind of progress into where the theory kind of comes from. We have this, when the film came out in 2003 by Coopler, they had just gone for their divorce, and conveniently this film came out quite quickly afterwards. But what they're saying in it was there was a lot of, oh, here we go, let me find it, sorry. Coopler basically, so initially a lot of fans and etc. like media in 2003 were convinced that Coopler's Lost in Translation was a dig at Spike Jonze and their divorce. Although there's many strong characters in this, you would initially think that Bob, which is Bill Murray's character, was who they were referring to in this sense. Although these accusations were actually made at Charlotte's husband, John. So Charlotte is there with her husband, John, and John is a photographer. He's out every single day shooting like commercials, advertisements, photo shooting, like models, etc. And obviously left Charlotte alone, so much so that she was actually able to build this like relationship with Bob's character. But the accusations were made at John, and there was actually interviews where she had actually, Sophia Coopler had been physically asked if this was a dig, and I've got a quote here. She says, "It's not Spike," which is about Giovanni's character John, and she continues to say, "But there are elements of him in there, elements of the experiences. There are elements of me in all the characters," and there was a lot of like, well, John's character is very, very similar to what Spike did when they were together. Like, he was out a lot, so there was a lot of like, that is just quite obvious. And did it take a lengthy toll on the relationships between these two directors? Was she trying to portray that in Lost in Translation, that she was left alone? She was going to all these places with him because she just wanted to be with him, but she never was actually with him. So did that take a toll on their lengthy relationship? And then also, was this why she took on a career as directing as well, to keep herself busy? There was a lot of like theories around that. But then looking at Her as a response to their relationship again, Her, they were convinced, was initially a response film, but then the theories came in that the two are very connected. In Her, we're seeing a lot of Theodore's like pain. We experience a lot of pain he goes through. He's obviously gone through a really horrible divorce with someone that he was with from a very young age. They were together for years, and there's a lot of flashbacks between him and his ex-wife, who's called Catherine, which actually weirdly, I love bringing this up. not Theodore, sorry, Joaquin Phoenix, and I can't remember her name, his current fiance, that's actually his wife in the film who plays Catherine. I can't remember her name. Do you know the name?
Oh, Rooney Mara.
Yeah, so Rooney Mara is actually playing Catherine, and then we have Joaquin Phoenix playing Theodore. And I don't believe they were together at the time, but they did get together, and they're now actually together in real life. So this is really interesting. Hopefully their relationship doesn't end that way, because they are probably my favorite relationship. They're so sweet together. But yeah, we see a lot of pain that Theodore goes through with Catherine. And then everyone was thinking, oh, well, maybe is Spike Jonze trying to describe the relationship and the hurt he went through to see his partner kind of like always dig at him for things and digging at him for things that he does and his creativity. Like, we see a lot of this in Theodore's character. Was that Spike Jonze's reflection of their marriage together and the pain he went through? So that's one thing about the connection between the film and their marriage. That's what we're kind of seeing.
Yeah, and that opens up the theory that pushes the theory wide open. And obviously for people listening, this is all theorized, but really interesting discussion. I mean, and the coincidences of them forming a future relationship in Joaquin and Rooney Mara, that's incredible.
I love, it's my favorite things.
Yeah, and it's clear that even if the theories aren't true and this is like more of a coincidental thing, you feel like maybe some of this, at least on the subconscious level, is doing something because of the themes that are so close. And did you want to maybe talk a little bit now about the actual theory themselves, what people have directly been saying now that we've got the relationship side? What are the main similarities you see between the two films?
So from what I've gathered from the first time I heard about this, actually, I didn't I found out about this from someone that he's massively into cinematography himself. He was the one that actually told me about the connection about it, and I was like, this is so fascinating. It goes right back to when the film Her came out in 2013, so this has been quite a prolonged theory. There's not really any new stuff that's come out about the two films, but at the first time, people's initial like interpretation, I've got a few things listed here that I could probably go into depth with. The first thing I watched, though, there is actually a Vimeo video of someone that has pieced together the scenes between Her and Lost in Translation, and he's put them, this person, well, I don't know if it's he, I'm just saying he, they've put them side to side, and it's actually quite parallel how the two films have the same sort of, I don't do like cinematography or anything myself, but just the settings and the colours and the sort of the things you feel when you're seeing these two scenes.
Yeah, they do have very similar sort of emotional tones, I think, the whole way through. I think when I watched both movies, because I didn't know about this theory at all until you mentioned it to me, and when I'm watching both films, I get that same feeling of their way they discuss isolation, but also the pacing of both films is quite slow, very character focused. Yeah, they almost feel like they could have come from the same director, which is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, like both films, in my opinion, do end on exactly the same sort of level. It's like, where the hell are they going with this now? And obviously they leave it for us to think about that, the audience, which I really love films. I love films that make you think. I love films that really pull on all of your strings. Like, it's very rarely I watch a film and cry, and every time I watch Her, I just cry because it's such a connecting film, although there is the disconnect of the film and you just can't feel hurt for it. And it's like, it is the sort of world we're going into now. Like, obviously right now in our current situation, like, the main thing we can do is connect and talk to one another.
Well, I want to give context to the listener for that then, because this episode obviously is coming out in sort of July area. It's currently the 3rd of April when we're recording this, so steeped at the moment in isolation, where like the themes of the film Her, we're using the internet and indeed an online service to record this podcast. It's, this connection, style of connection is more important than ever, really, isn't it?
But it is like, we are connecting right now, but there's still the sense of the physical disconnection that we're getting from this. Like, I do personally find it easier to talk to you face to face, Max, but
yeah, true, same.
like, it's just easier to interpret. And in Lost in Translation, obviously, there's a sense of loneliness, and they become a physical connection. And there's not really any sense of romance between Bill's character and Charlotte's character. I don't really see a sense of romance, but you feel like they're longing for just something physical, like they needed it. And in her, obviously, he has his friends and stuff and his ex-wife, but he finds the connection between someone that's not ever physically there. But what I wrote a little list of things that the internet has told me, and then these are my interpretation of what people have said. There's some really good like Reddit chat rooms and stuff about this, where you will actually find the Vimeo video. And then there's a few people that have wrote like little blog posts and stuff on like WordPress and stuff, where they've like done 10 things that relate her and Lost in Translation. So what the internet's pieced together, I shall start. I've got 8 here. The most important to me, I was like, yeah, these are things I noticed as well. The first one was laying in bed is the title. In Lost in Translation, one of the first scenes you actually see from Charlotte is she is laying in bed alone. And it makes you think, well, is she on her own? And then eventually, obviously, we find out that she is actually with her partner, but you actually only see John's character maybe about 4 times entirely in the film, which is actually quite saddening, because they're a new marriage. You think they'd be flourishing right now. And then obviously Bob's character is also, there's a lot of scenes of him as well in bed. And I think his relationship in the film is that he has a wife and a few kids, but they're not with him. And they've been together for about 25 years, but it doesn't seem to be like going very well. And then in reflection to her, a lot of the scenes we've seen from Theodore's character, he again is in bed alone, and he isn't really interacting with anyone. But what is important about these scenes is the theme of the bed is where these characters that we have fallen in love with are building relationships with other people. The lack of sleep that Bob and Charlotte get in Lost in Translation actually puts them into a situation where they meet each other. And then we have Theodore's character, who's in bed. He's using sex chat rooms, and he's also talking to Samantha. He also then finds a connection. He builds a connection from the lack of sleep he's getting. So there's this theme of insomnia that these characters are struggling with. Wherever I feel Theodore's insomnia is a haunting of that he's got too much in his mind. And Bob's and Charlotte's could be the fact that they're lonely, if not just the sheer time difference that you'll get in Japan. When I was there, I was struggling so much to sleep. We were sleeping at really weird times, but it is another city that never sleeps, that no one really talks about. The city is always alive. So that's my first connection that I found quite important. I don't know, did you want to like reflect on the things I bring up?
Well, let's reflect on the first one, and then we're going to move into the music feature. But let's reflect on that first one, because I find that interesting, the insomnia side of it, because overthinking is a theme that comes up a lot in both of these, and sort of when left in isolation, the one thing you do have is the mind. And you are right that it's when you've got that, you can almost never turn off. And it kind of proves an importance, doesn't it, in both films, to that of meditation. And I didn't realize it was a running theme in both of them. Like, one of obviously the most, and I think at this point I'm going to get into spoilers for both films. So if you haven't seen both films, this is the point where you should go and watch both of them before you come back to this episode. I'm putting down the shutter now. This is spoilers. But the ending of the film, of the film Her, where Theodore is laying on the bed with Samantha leaving, that's quite and probably the strongest moment of the film for me.
That is my biggest connection as well, because I can't describe it, but although he is laying on the bed and he's being left by her, they go into a set where they've seen him reminiscing, and he's hugging someone physically. So it's like, although she was never really physically there, all he can think about is the time that they spent in the mountains, and he's actually hugging someone while he's being left. And it's like, he's actually, what I get from that scene is that he's feeling the warmth and the embrace of the love they had, and he's finally letting go of it, but he's obviously going to struggle like a lot from that. And we never see what happens. We never see how he actually copes with her leaving.
No, but I think because it leaves it up to your interpretation, and I think that bit is so strong because it allows you to think about where he's gonna go, where his friend's gonna go. Because obviously I've forgotten the character's name, but when they're sat on that rooftop together, she's just come out of a relationship as well, so they're both hurting together.
I actually might have it here. Cast. We have Amy. Her name's Amy.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, and she's also been going through that same sort of pain. So there's so much interesting stuff here, Emma, and we're gonna keep going to it. We're gonna go to the 7 other points that Emma's got to bring up in just a moment.
I will try not to talk too much.
No, it's great. This is a really interesting discussion. But we're gonna just take a break for a moment. Maybe you can reminisce on some of them or contemplate some of these points and leave your thoughts in the comments below wherever you're listening on YouTube, SoundCloud, or Spotify to let us know what you think of it so far and this theory. We've got 7 more points to come from Emma, which is great, but we're going to move over to our music feature now, starting firstly with Sammy Bacon. Sammy's been on the show now for quite a while. He is our seasoned veteran of music, and Sammy, every single week, he now brings a album recommendation to you, the people. He's from London, but studies in Canterbury. That's how we got to know him, and he's been doing these incredible album reviews for us. So here is the album that Sammy recommends this week.
Hi everyone, what's going on? Hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying whoever's on the podcast. Here today, the recommendation is awesome, legendary, Danish post-punk and noise rock band Ice Age and their seminal, can't speak, but it's a very good album and it's called Ploughing into the Field of Love. And on this album, Ice Age move on from the very raw post-punk and noise rock roots and enhance it and embellish it with strings, horns and acoustic guitars. And on this album there is such a Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds vibe. This album is grandiose and confident and harrowing and depressing. The song like The Lord's Favourite is this swaggering rockabilly-esque song. And then it's contrasted with a more softer, more gentle but equally banging track Against the Moon, which has these wonderful strings, horns and these piano arpeggios. Ice Age, fantastic band. This is a brilliant record and is one of Ice Age's longest records. It's 50 minutes and that's not, the longest record out there, but considering the 2 previous albums were barely half an hour long, this is a massive artistic step forward for Ice Age and a must listen to record. Ice Age, Ploughing to the Field of Love. Listen to it now.
Thank you for that, Sammy. And we're going to tune in with Sammy once again next week for his next album recommendation. So excited to bring more album reviews to the show. And if you hear any of the albums that Sammy's recommended, let us know what you think. You can get in touch with the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast to let us know. Next, moving on. I mean, we're talking about films today anyway, but Harry Munday, every single week he does a film review for the show. He's based in Hastings, but lives in Canterbury at the moment, and he does a short quickfire film review, and we're talking about Her and Lost in Translation today, but Harry will have another feature for you. It's a very new feature to the show, so please do let me know what you think about this. Harry's great. He's got so many DVDs and films to go through. He's got so much in the pipeline down to come, but here for now is the film he recommends this week.
Hey Max, hope all's going well around your side of the woods. It's dear old Harry again, back with another weekly movie recommendation. This week's recommendation is the amazing family film The Princess Bride. Now, I know this movie came out years ago, but this honestly still stands the test of time. To this day, it is one of the best narrative stories I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. It's got quite a bit of comedy running through it also. And as I think a lot of people quite said, this is just every genre of a movie blended into one. It's got romance, it's got action, it's got comedy, it's got horror, it's got thrills, and it's all essentially just a kids film. That's the amazing part. You've blended all of this into like a high quality masterpiece, and you've made this family friendly. This movie still, as I said, stands the test of time compared to most family friendly movies nowadays. The only thing you could probably compare this to is Toy Story 3. Another movie I recommend. might do in the future, wink wink. Utter perfection. Every shot, it just exudes what it's aiming for. And you can feel just the passion behind everything. In fact, even Andre the Giant, the world's most intimidating wrestler, you managed to turn him into the most lovable oaf ever in this film. This was John Cena before John Cena was even thought about. This was Dwayne Johnson back when he was still in diapers. You've got the Princess Bride standing out, showing decades upon decades of films how to do family-friendly fun. I recommend you see this movie straight away.
And thank you for that, Harry. We're going to tune in with Harry once again next week and every single Thursday on the My Generation podcast to hear his next film review. Now, before we go back to Emma to go to the 7 different points that she's got about her and Lost in Translation, the 7 different connections that they've got still to go, maybe contemplate the one she's already come up with just while you're listening to Off Topic. They're a powerful, energetic and refreshing band. They're a no-fuss rock band that were formed in 2017. Initially they did covers of rocks and blues songs that they'd idolized before starting to write their own songs later in the year of 2017. And now they've got all this great music released. You can support all of them with the link in the description. And today, here now on the My Generation podcast, it's their song, Breakdown.
Daylight
and that was Off Topic with their song Breakdown here on the My Generation podcast. Please keep listening. We've got their song Regrets coming up at the end of the show as well, but we're moving straight back to Emma. You've now had time to think and cultivate about the first points and all of the high amount of really fascinating information she's already come at us with. Emma, what is the second connection you'd like to talk about?
The second one I would like to talk about is we're going to move into from the theme of them being in bed into the fact that the next theme is isolation. So both the films are in very big cities. We've got Her is the feature cities in Her is Los Angeles, which has been edited with Shanghai, which is in China. I've never been to either of these cities, but I know that they're very built up, and they also edited it so they were even more built up. The theme of isolation, though, and also, and then we've got Lost in Translation, which is in Japan. What they're trying to say with the isolation is the fact that they're feeling stuck physically and emotionally, which is causing these isolations. So we have the physical connection between the cities and the people. Like, cities are massive. When they're really built up, you feel so small in them, and it is kind of claustrophobic sometimes. And although there is so much to do, it's weird that these characters don't actually do a lot in the films. Obviously, we're seeing them like kind of live out their kind of work life, daily life, but they don't really move out of the main scenes, which we've got Bob and Charlotte in a hotel. And then we have Theodore in his apartment. And yeah, we do see them like take days out to do work and this and that and the other. But you don't get the sense of like they're actually enjoying any of it. There is no enjoyment from what they're doing. And it would be nice to see in the films if they changed the kind of pace of this, but also this is what we want. We want the isolation. That's the physical isolation. The emotional isolation, I'd feel, is their connection between failed relationships, which is actually another point I've made. So I'm kind of like worming into another point now, which is that they emotionally, in both films, they do talk about somewhat failed relationships. More so in Her, we have Amy and I think his name is Charles. These are Theodore's friends. They have a breakup. And then we also have Theodore predominantly going through a divorce, and you actually witness him divorcing his ex-wife, Catherine, in it. We actually witness him going through it. But then with Lost in Translation, there isn't the sense of that they have failed their relationships, but their relationships aren't brilliant. Like, it's very clear to see that Charlotte's character is not enjoying being with John. She doesn't enjoy her setting. She doesn't enjoy what's going on, although they're newly married. But we never get told how long they've actually been together, which is really interesting. Whereas Bob's character, he says that he's been married 25 years, and we hear him every now and then on the phone talking, and he just doesn't have this connection between her anymore. It's very like militant, like, talk to your kids, when are you gonna be back, what's this, what's that. It's very like there's a lot of instructions, and like that sort of like given, it's like there's a lot of like the conversations just aren't really fun. He doesn't even seem like he enjoys talking to his kids anymore. He probably sounds like he finds them as an inconvenience. But and it's weird because you'd think he'd enjoy being away, but at the same time he just doesn't seem like he has any enjoyment at all. So I feel that is kind of 2 points I've kind of kicked off there, because that's the sense of isolation, and another point was the failed relationships they're having.
Yeah, I think you are right. When with regard to the fact that they are in such a fruitful setting, there's so much that could be done, and they don't do a whole lot, but the films both still feel so beautiful because you are, even though you're in, I mean, a little bit more so with Her, a little bit of a future, they're so grounded in real experience. With every character, right, you almost you lose the sense that it's a film very quickly because of the way it's telling the story, both stories, and that isolation is so important. Like the stuff in Her, because Her's a film I think I know a little bit better, but But even when you have the moments where Theodore's walking alone through the city, they made it clear that every extra would walk in a different direction to him. So whatever direction he's walking, the extras are walking the opposite way. So it's almost feeling like the whole world is moving in the opposite direction to him, which is how that can sometimes feel when you're in that emotional state.
I actually didn't pick up on that. That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because in all of these scenes, I don't know how it works like with directors and cinematographers. I don't know if they like kind of discuss it and then it goes from there, or one of them has a point of view. But when they're alone in these scenes, like when you see Theodore walking or when you see Charlotte going out trying to just like do daily shopping, they cast the scenes so lovely. Like you actually like, in a way, you're kind of watching it like, I want to be there. I want to go to see these beautiful places and experience these beautiful things that they're experiencing. But then also you're like, why would I want to experience that when that's how they feel?
Yeah, and it also might show that like the glamour of it sometimes doesn't always, do it justice, because the images are so beautiful. And, people can see beautiful images from these places and think it must be an incredible life, and especially with their jobs and their caliber and the stuff they're doing. They've got a lot of success, all of these characters. Theodore's house is beautiful. All the characters in Lost in Translation have great jobs and they're in a great place. But sometimes that's not always enough.
There isn't gold sort of thing. Like, you can't, like, if gold is fake, you can't cover it in glitter and say it's gold again. Like, it's just not what it is. The value isn't there of something looking pretty, and you want the sense of value and clarification. What you do is fun. Like, there's nothing worse than being in a job that you hate, but it's like it seems like they're stuck in these jobs because it's the only thing keeping them going, like financially. And they obviously, in my sense, like if I was in a successful job, I think I would struggle getting out of it. As I'm like, I'm successful, what happens if I'm not, if I leave? And there is that sense of being, again, to the isolation and stuck. They're stuck physically and emotionally in these settings, but it's like it also makes you think what's keeping them there. And then obviously they're quite adventurous and they talk quite obviously about what keeps them there. But it's also like one of these things, like everyone goes through something like this, and that's why I think these films are so like beautifully like directed, and it's just like there's a lot of passion to them. Although if they were connected, it would make you think like there obviously is still the passion between these two directors, and they've just wanted to describe it in this way.
Yeah, and the ways are, considering, it was the relationship, between the two directors sounded like it had clearly a breakdown, which, caused the unfortunate divorce. But it sounds like that thematically they are quite similar because of the way they discuss these issues. They're tackling them in very similar ways. Did you want to move on to the next point now? Because you've covered the first three, isn't it? Because you covered sort of two in one there. So we're on to number 4.
Two birds, one stone. We could move on to now the intellectual connection. So we have, I would say in the two films, but the main characters would be Bob, which is Bill Murray's character in Lost in Translation, and then we have Theodore Tomley in Her. I feel they both start building an intellectual connection. Was the main theme of this topic. Is we have clearly what is an artificial intelligence with Theodore. She's learning as more interactions she has, the more she learns. Artificial intelligence is quite scary that way, but it's attractive. It's attractive to meet someone that is loving life and looking forward to life, and he does, and that is something actually I quote him saying in the film when he meets his ex-wife Catherine. He says that she loves life, and then Catherine gets on the defense and saying, you always wanted like a happy marriage, but you never wanted to be married. Like you always liked the idea of it, but you never wanted to physically do it. And then we have Bob's character. He meets this young, youthful girl that's not even experienced half the life he's experienced. And I think he sees a sense of himself in her and seeing the enjoyment she gets out of living. Obviously, she isn't entirely happy, but like it's something that he wants to connect to because he obviously misses it. And there is one or two scenes where them two are like kind of being childish and this and this and messing around and sort of thing, because it's returning the main characters back to what they want, but they never actually wanted it in the first place, which is quite unusual.
to think about.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Because, yeah, sort of, the main characters, they have, they the idea of seeing yourself in someone is really, really interesting, because then it gives more of a relation. Because I think the first time I watched Lost in Translation, I couldn't really put my finger on why these two people were connecting, but I think it's really, really crazy how life brings people together. Like, I think, I mean, just pulling from my own life experience, I've had people I call friends from all age brackets up as far as 75, from different walks of life, from the country, city, from other parts of the world. And I don't know, sometimes it's not always, there can be, and it is nice to have like things that bring you together, when you've got a cultural connection, but also seeing just something in you, of yourself in someone who's in a completely different situation to you, like these two have, where she's young and enjoying most of her life, is really interesting.
It's not only intellectual, there is a sense of both Bob and Theodore's character have already lived their lives, and they're technically meeting someone that's not even lived their life yet. Like, Scarlett Johansson's character is an AI, and you would consider the AI like probably to be like 1 or 2 years old, and is having to learn. And obviously the interactions with Theodore is making her learn. And then we have Bob meeting Charlotte. Charlotte's quite young, maybe like half his age. She's not lived her life, but she's growing into her life. I think he keeps a lot of his rubbish life from Charlotte, because he obviously doesn't want to dampen the fact that she might be in a horrible, boring like relationship. So like you see him having a lot of fun with her, and which is not really the character we were given in the first place. That he seems like a businessman. He's very like, I'm married, this and this. But you actually see his character develop from that, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, with Theodore as well. I think toward the start he talks a lot about being very scared that he's not going to experience anything different ever again. But then I think for both of these characters, sort of showing the respective sort of female characters in these stories that what life is like, or like the enjoyable parts of their life, has allowed them to sort of reflect more positively on the experience they've had, because they're sort of taking a tour through their lives and their experiences, talking about memories and things. And I think by having an outlet to express the lives they've lived, has kind of made them appreciate that life even more.
Yeah, definitely, because what we're introduced with these two characters that have gone through obviously emotional sort of traumas and are now just completely disconnected from the world. We never really see their character flourish until they meet the other character, which in most cases you will see in films. But it's like we're given one character, but then we see this whole new side to them, and it's just insane that it's like so much has been taken away from them from one or two bad experiences. It's kind of a shame.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, because they're letting individual moments sort of stick with them, which is very true of people. And sometimes those things that stick with you aren't even necessarily rational. Sometimes it's just whatever does. But yeah, I hadn't really made those connections with the film. This is probably the most psychological episode we've done in quite some time, but loving it. So Emma, shall we move on to the fifth point that links these stories together?
So the fifth point, a lot of people was the topic is Scarlett Johansson herself. Yeah, she's in both of the films, which is interesting. So what the difference is between these, in Lost in Translation from the start, Sophia Coppola actually casted her throughout the entire film. There was no hesitation. She wanted Scarlett. And then in her, initially actually, Scarlett Johansson's character wasn't casted until August 2013, which was 2 months before the film actually came out. So she was actually casted post-production, and she replaced a other actress, which was called Samantha something. I do have it. Samantha Morton. So when you watch the film, Joaquin Phoenix actually isn't interacting with Scarlett Johansson at all. He's interacting initially with Samantha Morton, and then what they did in the last 2 months, they recasted all of the voices so that Joaquin was actually then interacting with Scarlett Johansson, and this was all done post-production, which would have been really, really insane and really stressful to do in 2 months, to get all the voices done and redo them and have them all dubbed back over the film and then set into the film. So there is this situation, like, was it coincidence that Spike Jonze then chose Scarlett Johansson when he didn't initially want to cast her? His his response to it was that he found Joaquin and Scarlett interacting better. They were having a better chemistry than he was with the initial actress Samantha, which, in my opinion, I don't know if it was coincidence. I think it was convenient that he ended up having Scarlett Johansson, because it ends up just having that major connection. Like, why would you pick the same actress from the initial film? But then there's this progression between Charlotte's character into Samantha. It's kind of unusual because in Lost in Translation, when we're first casted with Charlotte, she's very passive, she's very quiet, she doesn't really want to interact with anyone. We don't actually really see her character glow until she meets Bob, and there is this like sense like, oh, she's like lived a life. Maybe Charlotte's character and Samantha's character, which was a thing that I thought about, maybe it is a massive long progression of one character in themselves, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, and that is really interesting. I always keep forgetting it's the same one. I did actually know about the acting situation, but I didn't find that out until after I'd seen it, and you'd never know. Like, if you watched Her and you didn't know that they'd recast it, I don't think you'd be able to tell. But I think, yeah, it's. I guess that question will really never be answered, and only the director will know whether the casting was based on performance. Because, yeah, I think artistically you can be quite brutal, and if there's a big change that needs to be made and you can make it in post-production, do it, because if you can. But yeah, I can imagine that must have been super stressful with only 2 months before release. Wow.
It came out in October, because I remember it was around my birthday. But no, it's just, it was when he was asked about it, because he was like, obviously the speculations then come up that it was a response, and then they were like, well, you use the same actress, it's obvious you. And his response to it was just that the chemistry, and he said he was saying it was easier for Scarlett to feel. So when you're hearing, you're not seeing this actress for one, you're hearing her, and he said that Scarlett just picked it up better. You could feel the character when Scarlett was talking more than when Samantha was talking, which is a bit harsh to say, but then they were like, well, is it convenient? And I just found it coincidence. I think it's more of a coincidence that I'd say it's more of a convenience, because it is interesting. I would love to know the answers to that, but it's one of these things we're never going to know.
Yeah, I think as a director, I'm gonna err on the side of saying that I think when it comes to performance, it's never even usually about like the quality of the performance. So like, he probably got to post-production, and if the decision was a creative one, then it's probably more on the basis that, you know, she's definitely not a bad actress, otherwise she wouldn't have been cast in the first place. It's just the right fit for that performance. And audio recording is very different to filming. I mean, I do this podcast. I'd really struggle to do this, as a filmed live TV show every week, you know.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, no, I just think it's a bit of an interesting one, because in 2003, I think it was like kind of the start of Scarlett Johansson's career. In 2013 ended up being kind of a peak, because she was being put into Marvel films and all sorts. So she was quite a busy woman, and there was a lot of issues with Scarlett Johansson. Like, a lot of her roles were given to her because of how she looked, and obviously, and I think there's a sense of respect that Spike Jonze had for her, knowing this, because he was like, well, you can't see it, you can just hear her voice, and her voice herself is just bloody beautiful. Just this sense of like innocence and all of this, and like the way she talks, and she's like breathing and stuff, although she's AI, it's like, it does make you feel like you are talking to a human, which is obviously what they're trying to get to in the virtual world of her.
Yeah, it's so true, and she does get that across. Like, as I said, I mean, I didn't even know at first that that's what was happening. And besides the Marvel movies, I'd actually barely seen anything from Scarlett Johansson. So yeah, she when I watch Lost in Translation, it always feels like a more modern movie than it is, because I know 2003 isn't that long ago, and saying it feels long ago makes me feel old, but it's like it feels more modern because it's such a mature performance from everyone involved in it. And to think that was the beginning of her acting career is incredible, because she's, only gone on leaps and bounds, and and the success has proven that with being, picked up by big studios and playing lots of different characters that she's clearly really enjoying as well. I think she clearly really enjoyed both of the roles, even though her was on a shorter time frame, and knowing that now really does change viewing experiences. But yeah, it doesn't feel rushed, which is very important. And Emma, did you want to move on to point number 6?
I think this was an interesting one. There was a topic called awkward encounter. So in both the films, we experience an awkward encounter between the two main characters. I don't know if this is because obviously it seems that his character, Bob, has been known by this like company that, or whoever he's working for. They seem to know him, and they seem to know a past version of him. So it seems like he's probably not been there for a while. And it's really it's a funny scene, but it's like you can tell, like I'm watching it and I'd be like, that is uncomfortable, and you do feel uncomfortable as an audience for him. You're like, I don't know if he wants this, but there is a sense of like he's definitely had this done before and he has enjoyed it once before. He just doesn't enjoy it now, and that was that scene. But then in Her, Samantha suggests to Theodore that their relationship can become physical, although it is just like them talking. I can't remember the name of the actress, but they get her to pretend to be Samantha. So it's like, oh, hi Theo, I'm home, and then they're trying to make the relationship physical, and Theo really doesn't like it. He really, really finds it uncomfortable. Like, he does love Samantha, but obviously it seems like the conversation was never really discussed, and Samantha just kind of like bounced this on him, and he's just like going along with it as he's trying to save something. So there is the sense of both of them have an awkward encounter, and it just seems like it is very uncomfortable actually to watch. We just feel like okay, but yeah, that is another awkward encounter. Not that it's relatable, but that was one thing a lot of people were bringing up, is that there was awkward encounters. I don't really know the psychology behind why people are bringing it up. I think they're just being like, oh, these two scenes happen and they're very, very similar to one another.
And I think that if that topic actually gets explored a little bit more in Blade Runner 2049. So in that movie, there is a similar scene between the main character Kay and an artificial intelligence, Joy, which it's the same situation with Scarlett Johansson's character, but it's physical. So it's not a character that can actually physically interact and move. It is a hologram, but they expand on that. So I would honestly say that Blade Runner 2049 is up there for the same reasons I enjoy Her. And so if you want an even further exploration, maybe next time we can tie in the theory of how Blade Runner 2049 is in the same universe, but that's getting way out of hand.
That would be insane, yeah. Oh god.
Yeah.
Like, it's like the next level from Her goes into Blade Runner. Oh. Blade Runner is a brilliant film though, like, off topic, very good film. It's one of my mum's favourites, so
yeah, that's a classic for many different reasons. But yeah, did you want to bringing it back to these two films? Let's move on to point 7.
Point 7 would be, I would like to talk about the Vimeo video a bit more. I know we have kind of already in depth. I know I should have probably brought it up so soon, but the Vimeo video, I haven't watched it in depth. I've kind of like brushed over it. But I would really, really recommend people to watch it if they're listening to this. It's really easy to find. You just literally type in Her in translation into Google and it comes up straight away. But it's just really, really insane how the colours and the themes and everything, like, I can literally watch it now and describe it. It's just insane how the colours are the same as sort of scenes. So we have, like, right now we've got Theo on the train. He's like looking at something. Now we're witnessing scenes of all of the characters all just laying in bed, just sitting there doing nothing. The colours are exactly the same, which is crazy. Even the settings of like silhouettes looking out into this big, wide, massive window looking out into a massive busy city. Although it's nighttime, the city is still alive and they are also awake, which is really sad, like, in a way. But yeah, I would really, that's kind of the point I was trying to bring up, is watch this Vimeo video. It's insane. Like, we've got so many scenes that are similar and you're just like, wow, like, just the shots that they're taking over the cities and stuff is just yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, this is stuff that unless you unless you watch them almost side by side, you don't even notice. So yeah, putting the actual imagery of the two cities, and as you said about, I didn't know that Shanghai was merged with LA for her. I thought it was just America. So that's really interesting, both with having
Of the casting that they chose Los Angeles and Shanghai in the mid 2012 is what they. Yes, it says principal photography took place in Los Angeles and Shanghai.
interesting. Yeah, and what was the last point then to round all this home?
Oh, last point is, if you haven't watched Lost in Translation, the most frustrating part of the film, what does Bob say to Charlotte at the end? Because, so this is one of the things I think a lot of people then, when this topic comes up, is what order do we watch Her and Lost in Translation? What order do we watch the films in? And there is a bit of like an argument with this online. From what I've read and what I deduce, I'd say watch Her, then Lost in Translation.
Why is that?
I don't know why. I couldn't tell you why, but just there's like I don't know. It's weird. It seems like I would like What Does Bob Say to Charlotte to be the last thing I experience with the two films. Just because it's more of an opening act than what we see at the end of Her. At the end of Her, it seems like the story can go on. But then in Lost in Translation, like, the ending scene is just so frustrating. So many people have tried to deduce what he actually says, but there's also theories. It could be, is Sophia Coppola trying to say something to Spike Jonze? Is she trying to say something to him? But then also a lot of people have led off from that and saying, because she's like left something unsaid, this is what Spike Jonze has interpreted from what was said. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and maybe because it's the last line, you don't need to hear the ending. It's you've interpreted enough on your own, and now it's your job as the audience or whoever's theorizing to push on and think about this. I think that's why this theory's probably come up, because both of them leave so much to your interpretation that at the end of the day you can theorize forever, and you can make one argument that it doesn't even matter what's said. I mean, there's a really great movie called A Ghost Story. You've seen that, haven't you?
Sorry, what's it called?
A Ghost Story, the Daniel Lowry movie with Casey Affleck and, interestingly, Rooney Mara.
I think I've seen it. I can never remember if I have. I know. Is it really sad?
Yeah.
But the person under the seat.
It's the ghost sheet. Yeah.
I like to say I think I have. I can't remember if I have. I'm pretty sure it's one of those films that you know if you've seen it. So I'm going to say no.
No, fair enough. Because I've recommended it before on the podcast, and I thoroughly would. It's a 2017 movie, and that has a note in the wall kind of situation where, like, whether you read it or not is actually quite important to the story. And sometimes whether you get to see the information or not, sometimes it's more powerful to hide that information, because it leaves the interpretation of what that person's final words might be to someone. And so yeah, I think that by not expressing it, it's more interesting, because it's raised all these questions. Wow. Well, that's 8 very interesting points about both movies. Do you know what? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Let us know by either contacting the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast, or leave a comment wherever you're listening, YouTube, SoundCloud, or Spotify. Love to keep this going, because these are 2 films that I absolutely adore. And we're going to go back to Emma in just a moment to continue the discussion about these 2. I'm just going to tease ahead to a few more things we've got coming up on the podcast, though. We've got some really, really great episodes. Firstly, we've got Ava Skoracki. She is a film production student. She's coming on to talk about production design within the world of film. Could actually play hand in hand quite nice with some of the stuff we've talked about today. And she's going to be talking about what it's like being a production designer, as it's a massive passion for her. We've got Connor Jenkins coming back on the show, the lovely Connor Jenkins. We're doing a Dungeons and Dragons episode very, very soon. writing a bespoke story for the My Generation podcast to play, and we'll get that episode to you as soon as possible. And we've got returning guest Joe Finnegan. We're talking about horror video games in that one, thrilling video games, games that get your heart racing. If that's the episode for you, then stay tuned. And Joe is going to become a regular feature on the show. The same thing that we do with Sammy and Harry, where they come on every single week. Joe is going to be doing the same as of the end of August. He's going to be coming onto the show every single week to bring video game reviews. So if you're an avid gamer, keep listening to the show, because Joe's going to have his recommendations coming at the end of August. And coincidentally, Emma's going to also be joining the lineup in the same way as Sammy, Harry, and now Joe. Emma's going to be doing some poetry stuff. We've spoken about poetry before, so if you want to hear more details about what's going to be coming up on that, feel free to listen to episode 54 again. And then from the end of August, Emma will be bringing short poetry sections to the podcast. Very excited to bring all of that in. So much new content coming up on the show, plus all the musical features. Now, before we go back to Emma to continue the discussion, there are future topics we're still looking for people to talk about. I want to talk to people about fitness. What are you doing to stay fit? And do you live in the area of Kent? Are you between the ages of 18 and 35? If so, get in touch with that Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast. Would love to get you on the show to have a chat. And now, just finally, before we go back to Emma, we're going to go back to Off Topic. They're the powerful, energetic, and refreshing band. That's the words used to describe this no-fuss rock band. Formed in 2017, they started doing covers of rock and blues songs from musicians they idolized, but they started writing their own songs later in the year. And now, here on the My Generation podcast, just so you got a bit of time to reflect on some of the points that really interesting points Emma's had on the show today. Here's their song, Regrets. and that was Regrets by Off Topic here on the My Generation podcast. Hope you've had just a few minutes just to calm and think about some of the really thought-provoking points Emma's brought to the show. Emma, you've talked about the 8 pillars and you've done all the introductory stuff. Is there any sort of points that we've missed out that you still want to talk about on the show?
I think it would be like one of those final thoughts things, wouldn't it? Like, is this a response? And my conclusion would be, yeah, Spike Jonze's Her, an unloved story, is a response to Lost in Translation. There's just too many, like, honestly, the more you read about it, the more you could talk about this. And I would really love to hear that people are going to then read about this and have their own points to bring up. Like, I've only brought up the ones that are emotionally connecting to me, but everyone else has their own like thoughts on this. Like, everyone's going to interpret this very differently.
Yeah.
And it'd be really cool to hear what people have to say about it.
Yeah, and I think taking it from my perspective, where I am an avid writer, director, I kind of feel like I can... Is empathise the right word? Empathise or sympathise with both directors' situations, because I feel like there's something within writing. I forget its specific name. It does have a name, and it's really frustrating. I can't remember it. Where you unconsciously are connecting things that you've experienced, and you forget where they come from, and then they come out in your work. And it can sometimes become quite obvious in the work where they've come from, but not to you. It's like almost a blind form of inspiration that you're taking from your own life. It's why sometimes like people can get in trouble with like copyright infringement. There can be problems there where, like, you've taken inspiration from something you saw when you were like 5 years old, and you completely lost your trace of it, and you've come back and made something that's oddly similar to it. And that sort of artistic license is a really, really interesting discussion. For me personally, I've subconsciously put stories from my past into things that I've written, and only when people who know me really well have consumed that content have been like, whoa, Max, this is telling me this about you as a person, as a writer. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't even mean that. And there's something, whether to sort of put my 2 cents in, I don't know whether it was deliberate or not, but I think if it wasn't, then there's very unconscious links there that are communicating. There's some sort of communication there, whether it's conscious or not. And to me, it's really interesting how real life influences always bleed into your work, regardless, I think. And there's something kind of beautiful about that, because at the end of the day, if Her had been made in the 90s, it would have been a different film and Lost in Translation. If they've both been made while they were still together, or had both been made if the breakup had gone differently, the films probably would have had different outlooks anyway. But that's fascinating to me.
I feel if they didn't break up, these films probably wouldn't exist. Like, they've created something quite beautiful, something quite devastating, and a lot of creativity myself, like from writing, does come from like devastating points of view. Oh, what was the one I did? A Your Bard recently, so we're talking like March at the moment. The theme was healing, and I did my theme on it was a car crash, and I called it Green Means Go. And I didn't realize that actually I'd made it very similar to one of my favorite spoken word artists, and I was like, oh damn, like this is like low key like copyright, but it's like my interpretation of healing was like, when I get to it, it's kind of like chaotic, and a car crash is chaotic, so that's where I went from this. But yeah, probably I might feature that at one point.
Yeah, well, stay tuned on the show. I mean, every Thursday coming from the end of August, Emma's going to be bringing that poetry. But yeah, that's fascinating to me. I always find that so interesting in my writing, where you put in details which are so personal, but then you create something beautiful out of something so personal, and it then doesn't become like you've influenced so many people in a beautiful way. And I like taking situations that maybe aren't the best and trying to do good things with them. So like a situation that hasn't got positive merits, like a divorce, and creating 2 beautiful films that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people can resonate with.
Absolutely. Like, I feel like, because I've shown the film to quite a few people, and I love hearing their interpretation of it, like how they feel from it. Like, if I was to be personal about the films, my personal connection between the film is I really struggle with social media, and obviously in our current situation, that's the only way we can connect, and it removes a social construct from me, is that me having to rely on my phone. I really like being able to get up and just leaving my phone, or oh, I've lost my phone, or oh, I've forgotten about my phone today. Like I do that quite a lot, and it's kind of like disconnecting to have to rely on something so much just to like hear someone's voice. And that, to me, the connection of the film Her is what was with me. Like I felt that, and I was like, damn, like this sucks, but it's going to happen at some point, and here we are having to deal with it right now. So I'm like, oh
Yeah, but I think also, that's gonna go when, hopefully when you're listening to this, it's a different world. But when we're allowed, back out, and things start to return to somewhat of a normality, as different as the world will be as a result of this, it will make you appreciate, or certainly will for me, the human interactions again, won't it? The connections you get with people. Because I think growing up, I was a little bit more of that introvert kind of person. So when I watched Her, it was a lot of the themes of, am I going to get stuck in a social world and not really connect with people again in the same way? And that's a great theme. It's why it's one of my favorite films of all time. Will we get too socially isolated? But then in this situation that we're in today, the power of social media is incredibly important to me. I think it's utterly showing its most positive outlets, being able to connect people. I'm in phone calls all the time. I'm doing podcasts. It's nice to still be able to interact. It's also nice to have that alone time and be able to be comfortable in your isolation, because I think one thing that both films discuss is trying to be comfortable in your own isolation, because if you can be comfortable on your own, then you can do anything, really, to me. And I think that's why meditation's so important.
yeah, like I've gotten so creative lately. I have little projects here and there around my house. It's been quite like relieving to have this time to do things. And also, like what I said earlier to you, it's nice to have this appreciation for the really small things that keep us actually sane, which is creativity, arts, and all of that. Like just watching Netflix is art. Like you're watching art, and now we're relying on it. And also, it just makes you want to feel something.
Yeah, and the artistry of that is so important. It's like for the first time in 3.5 years, I've started playing video games again. And before, the reason I quit, I quit because I was struggling with being addicted to it. And coming back in this time, I am now actually able to. I'm not, and it's great. I've been able to control it. I'm not playing for longer than an hour and a half a day at maximum, which is a big step from what I used to do. And having I'm playing quite tactical games with friends, games that make you feel something, and because they're quite competitive games, I feel like I'm quite a competitive person, and that was one thing that when this whole isolation thing kicked off, that I felt I lost straight away. And for whatever you need to find an outlet that's going to be great for you, so you can still have some sense of normality in this time. I know that the world in the future is going to be a holistically different place, but it's been really interesting how there's so many positives and negatives to the technology and the isolation that these two films discuss. And I mean, when I first saw Her, I knew it was a film ahead of its time, and it's interesting that it's already showing that a 2013 film is. I mean, I saw it for the first time in 2016. I thought this must have come out like a couple weeks ago. But and even Lost in Translation, that's why, I mean, I've mentioned a few times, it feels like a more modern film than it is. But not for the same reasons that others do. So, for an example, Citizen Kane that came out in 1941. And that's a movie that feels modern to me because of how it's constructed as a film, the camera angles, the pacing of the film, and I don't want to get confused with this. So Citizen Kane feels modern because of how it's shot and shown to you, not necessarily the themes, but actually the fact that it feels like a cinematic modern experience. The reason Lost in Translation and Her feel like modern films is because the topics they're discussing feel light years ahead of their time. They're contemplating the direction of technology and our connection with other people in a way that I don't think necessarily being questioned as much, and now are getting questioned more. I think that the fact that these theories are being created, shows just how much people care about these. Well, Emma, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this stuff with us. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure after this call ends, I'll be like, God damn, I could have mentioned that, could have mentioned this.
Yeah, it's always the way. But no, that was fascinating. And you're going to be hearing on the podcast a lot more of Emma coming up in the future with the poetry features we're going to be doing, which is really great stuff. So excited to keep on expanding the show. Thinking back to just, Emma, thinking back to just even our first episode we did together, episode 7, feels like light years ago.
Almost be a year now, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, I mean, well, when this episode comes out, I genuinely think it would have been a year since we recorded that first one, which is quite poetic in a way as well. So it's only expanding from here. And we're gonna speak to Emma on the podcast and have another still full episode. So even though she's going to a weekly feature, it doesn't mean we won't do full episodes with Emma. We've got one planned coming up to talk about a trip. Was it to India? Was that in 2019?
Yeah, that was last year in August, and I went for 3 weeks to help a friend study. And it was a huge culture shock. Like, I've been to big cities now since. I had also been to big cities before, and it's just culture shocks, the differences between all of them. If I had to compare all of them, it's crazy. Like, it's one of those things I wrote about a lot.
And I'm really fascinated to have that discussion with Emma and bring that to the show in the future. Hopefully sort of get that to you before 2020 is out. So that would be really great to have that chat. But thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of the show. This is probably going to be one of the longer podcast episodes, but fascinating discussion. We've had some really nice longer conversations. So let me know in the comments as well what you think of the fact that obviously these episodes come out on a Thursday, but now the show is bi-weekly. So we've got 2 episodes coming out every single week. The Sunday night ones are much shorter, and it's just me and you talking about a movie review anecdote or something like that. And then on the Thursday episodes, you've got the guest, you've got the music, and all these features, which are really great additions to the show. But let me know if you like the balance where we've got one long episode in a week and then one short episode, or if there's anything you want me to change for the future. If there is, let me know in the comments. I'm looking to still, as I have been since the start, bend and mold the show to what the listeners would like to hear, because your opinions and thoughts are very important to me, especially for getting through what must at least be at this point an hour and 20 minutes worth of us talking. The time has absolutely flown by. It does not feel like that at all. Wow. But that's it for this week's episode of the show. So please do keep on listening. This Sunday I think I'm actually going to be elaborating on my discussion about video games. So the part I mentioned where I was talking about video games coming back into my life and that actually being a positive thing, I'm going to be elaborating on that on this upcoming Sunday edition of the show. And every Sunday is going to be a personal topic. So if you've got questions for me as the presenter, let me know, and I could do a Sunday evening feature on that. They're just a lighter, shorter form discussion with me. And then next Thursday, we've got Ava, who's doing production design with music by Anna Eugenia, who's been on the show before with some of her really great stuff. So very excited to bring Anna back on the show and Ava to discuss production design in the world of film. So we're keeping it very cinema, because I know for the last few weeks it's been very cinema. So I hope you're enjoying that as a theme. I could talk about it all day. So that concludes this week's episode of the show, and it's goodbye from Emma.
Bye. Lovely talking to you.
Lovely talking to you too, Emma. Thanks so much. We'll have Emma back on the show very soon, and it's a goodbye from me, and we'll tune in with you on Sunday for the next episode of the My Generation podcast.